So, hello and welcome to this more informal chat, discussion about your comments and some of the questions that I have received. There have been only a few videos, there have been less videos recently, so consequently, although I've had an absence, there have been less questions. As I increase the videos again, now we should have more comments and questions to discuss in the days to come. I'm now here in the new kuti, an old building, but it's been cleaned up for me. The ongoing work, they're still fitting the washroom, so I won't be around for a couple of days because that is continuing tomorrow. I have a respite from dust and digging and concreting and this and that going on today. I thought I'd take this opportunity to catch up, albeit a little informally. However, in the mornings early, every day, I'll continue with morning chanting. And in due course, also the same in the evening with some guided meditation. That's all to come. I remember being very inspired some years ago now, seeing a video on, it was probably YouTube, and of Ajahn Panyawado. Ajahn Panyawado was actually an English monk living at Wat Pantad Longta Mahaboa's monastery in Thailand for a good part, if not most of his life, in fact. Most of his life he was a monk, and he died there. And some would say he was an arahant, some would say he was certainly highly attained. I certainly believe that, I certainly understand that, having heard his teachings, read his writings, and very much admired him as a teacher, the way he taught and the way he lived his life. Certainly with considerable discomfort, being English in a foreign land, and also having some very major serious disabilities as a result of TB as a young man in England, and then coming to living in India, where his father was an engineer at the gold mines in a place called something like that, quite near where I stayed, near Bangalore, Goldfields it's called, in South India. He spent his childhood there, and at one place or another he had TB, I think as a result of unpasteurized milk, drinking unpasteurized milk, and had very painful joints in his ankles and feet, or one of them. And nevertheless so, he strived on with his life, his education, his potential career, and went into engineering himself, but eventually found his way into monasticism. Now, I'm not to talk about that today, but what inspired me was he was able to sit in his kuti in Thailand, and even back then, this is a very long time ago, someone had the very bright inclination to video him talking to his lay followers there, some of whom are present today on YouTube giving their own talks, and I'm not going to mention any names in case I get them wrong, but they'll often refer to those talks, and that in turn has also inspired me over the years to see how his teachings from young monastics then are still being reflected by more very senior monastics today, bhikkhunis included. This is an important thing to understand and appreciate when we look at the Dharma as being how it flows like a life force throughout all of us. It isn't something anyone possesses. It isn't particularly the skill of a skilled teacher. It is the word of the Buddha being passed down. But we find teachers whom we have some form of synergy with, that we can listen to comfortably. As in anything we're learning, we need to get on with the person teaching us. It assists with the learning process. It isn't a judgmental aspect of us picking and choosing between teachers. I think it's a very important thing that we are comfortable and happy listening to those that we are learning from. And his way of teaching in a very relaxed fashion, what got me thinking about this was because it's very hot. So I'm talking to you at around tea time today, around 3 o'clock. And to put my robes on in here would be very uncomfortable. So you're joining me for tea, but without the tea, because it's a bit hot for that. So I've just had some water. It's enough. It will do. He would sit and talk to his lay folks on his veranda. I was going to sit out there on the veranda, but it's not quite ready for that yet. There's a bit of tidying up needs sorting out. But when I can, you can join me outside with the trees in the forest here. But for now, I also have the fan to just keep me a little bit cool. His inspiration then has gone on through, renowned forest teachers today, whom have a very similar, from different countries and different places in the world, but have a very similar teaching style, a relaxed discussion like this over tea. And we don't all have the opportunity to go and stay in monasteries with our teachers to learn that way, but I have certainly learnt that way through teachers living in those places whom have taken the time to share this with us. And as I say, it's not a new thing, going right back to the time of Ajahn Panyavado, which is back in, these videos would have been recorded back in the late 80s, I should think early 90s. Obviously it was later on that they went on YouTube, but they were there. And Ajahn Chah also, the teacher of my first and many of my teachers in that Ajahn Chah lineage of Thai Forest, the Thai Forest tradition coming from Thailand. Also there are videos and pictures, but many recorded audio videos of him, as there are Longta Mahaboa. So this is a very useful medium for that, and sometimes I think okay to have it in a more informal way. So today we're having that chat, a talk about your comments and questions. I've spoken a little bit more about something that just came to mind rather than getting on with the task in hand, which I will do now. But it's all related, because it says, this first question, hello, do you think one which can't read and is intellectually low, that without learning in an intellectual way, one can achieve enlightenment? And if so, does one understand fully what he is experiencing when he doesn't know even words, for example, liberation and such? Yes, absolutely, of course, definitely. One does not have to have a high level of intellect. One doesn't learn the Dharma intellectually. One can learn the Dharma intellectually, but I would certainly say, if anything, that can be, to some extent, a hindrance to attaining enlightenment, because one is prone with intellect to over-question, over-examine, overthink what is relatively simple, in fact, for us to understand, the word of the Buddha. There is suffering, a cause of suffering, an end of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering. What can be more simple than that? Now I don't know whether you're referring to yourself or others, but nevertheless, can rest assured that enlightenment comes from the practice the Buddha teaches us. In those Four Noble Truths, there is suffering, a cause of suffering, an end to suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering. The path leading to the end of suffering is the Noble Eightfold Path of Sila, moral virtue, Samadhi, meditation, and Panya, developing wisdom. Not the wisdom of the intellectual kind, but the wisdom of understanding, knowing those Four Noble Truths deeply in your heart, a feel for them, a deep understanding and appreciation of the truth of existence for all beings, that we're all a little uncomfortable at times. This dust, this is a very dusty room, and there's some sweeping going on outside, which I really like because it reminds me of being in the forest monasteries, where at this time I am usually sweeping. There's usually sweeping going on. So this is very making me feel very at home here in Sri Lanka. I'm feeling at home anyway, but more so with that. It's very nice. Sweeping is very, very therapeutic and a common practice amongst monks. It's not one of the standard meditations, but it's certainly akin to walking meditation. But back to your question, intellectualism is nothing to do with enlightenment. Enlightenment is this full appreciation of the teachings of the Buddha, the word of the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha, and even in their simplest form, can lead through moral virtue, keeping precepts, simple precepts, and practicing meditation to enlightenment, which is the full, deep understanding of the cause of suffering, which allows you to eradicate that cause, cut the ties, the fetters of desire that keep us fueling that suffering. Desire is the cause of suffering, and we add fuel to desire by keep going out looking for ways to satisfy insatiable thirst and craving through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, wanting more films, more movies, more food, more this, more that, more sensual experience physically, intellectually, more learning. Again, this is where it comes in as contrary to the teachings of the Buddha. Let that all go also. Put it down, put the books down. In fact, someone has just sent me a great big long, well, not a great big long, I didn't read it all. It was what do you call it, a document on, I was just saying about the dust and I went off track. It's making me cough a little bit. So the morning chanting is a bit croaky, and excuse me if I cough like this. This is a lot of dust in the air. It's very hot, very dry. And concrete, when they cut concrete to make holes in floors, it makes a lot of dust. It seems to continue to settle. I don't know where it's coming from, but it's continuing. Anyway, we can get bogged down in this intellectual learning and study, which does not allow us to free our minds from suffering. It becomes almost another craving, another thirst for knowledge. Now I've gone completely off the track and forgotten what I was going to say. Maybe it'll come back later. Oh yes, so someone sent me this document. I think I've got a couple of questions coming up about jhanas. Now I will talk again about the stages of samadhi and the stages of the four jhanas and the four rupa jhanas and the four arupa jhanas. I will talk about that again soon, because people ask me about jhanas. I have a tendency to refer them to a video I talked about jhanas a long time ago now. And I think the time has come for me to start not repeating the videos I've made before, but to talk again about those subjects from a place of 1 year's experience at least of actually practicing what I preach, if that makes sense. Practicing what I'm saying we should do for the last year, and now talking to you about the same subject again will come from a somewhat different and informed perspective, I would imagine. I don't know. For sure, we will see. I don't watch these videos, so I won't even be able to compare. But certainly I think if I was to talk about something now compared to, in terms of Dharma, to a year ago, I have I have more. It's coming from a place of even more experience than before, because I've spent the last year just practicing. That's all, nothing else, without really much to interrupt it. Of course, travel and living conditions and things, the usual monastic surrounding environments, but geared towards practice through the support and protection of the Vinaya, the rules of monastic living, the rules of a monk's life or a nun's life, that keep us on the path. So a year later, I think it is okay and time to perhaps review some of those subject matters. So I will be talking again in more detail about jhanas soon. But the comment that came just, an email I received, sent me asking me about jhanas, I referred them to those old videos, was a long document someone had taken from, I don't know, the internet or somewhere, about them. And my simple answer was, we can read the menu, but it is better to taste the food. So back to this original question about intellectualism, to become attained, you cannot learn to swim from a book. You have to jump in the water. This is the only way. So you can, even if you're illiterate, become enlightened if someone explains to you the Dharma, the word of the Buddha. Just that. The Four Noble Truths and the practice. The characteristics of existence, anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness or suffering, and not self, or the absence of this personality, and the practice of sila, samadhi, panya, moral virtue, meditation, and developing wholesome mind states, reducing unwholesome mind states, wisdom of that nature, not intellectual knowledge. I like that question a lot because it comes from a place of my own experience so far. I've got a long way to go with my practice of Buddhism, and I've always gravitated towards the teachings of teachers, or the assistance of teachers, whom simply put it into everyday terms about our lives, reflecting upon how we do things, what we experience whilst we're doing those things. When I'm having to listen to a lecture, a lot of it in a foreign language or Pali, and being read from a huge book or a document in a very, very expertly done way, and even recited very admirably and perfectly, I tend to zone out a little bit and switch off. But when somebody talks to me one-to-one from a place of experience, that is when the Dharma is absorbed. That's when I absorb the Dharma anyway. Hello, could you tell us more about Sariputta? How could we be more like him? I am new to all this. Sariputta was the Buddha's right-hand man. So he had two first disciples, often depicted as statues either side of him, whom would sit on his right and left. So depending how you're viewing the Buddha. In this case, if you can see my Rupa, Sariputta's there, Moggallana is there. They were actually friends and they found the Buddha. I'm not going to tell you the whole story. The best place to find it, you can Google it, and there's stuff about Sariputta there. But there's a wonderful book by Wisdom Publications called The Great Disciples of the Buddha. I think it might be just Great Disciples of the Buddha. And recently, in some talks from a Abhayagiri monastery in California, they did read this section if you want to look that up on YouTube, very beautifully and in English, and that is the best recollection of Sariputta's life and Moggallana, being as they were friends. There's two separate chapters in that book about those two very prominent disciples. Sariputta was the marshal of the Dharma. He was the knowledgeable one of Dharma practice. Moggallana was the one with all the powers and the magic powers. He became an arahant slightly later, but it was just their ordination timings that make one seem more senior than the other. But they were both looking for something different to what they were originally experiencing together when they came across the teachings of the Buddha and found something different. So I would point you in that direction if that's possible for you to get that book, find that book online or something. Or there certainly are excerpts from it and being read from it in various formats and places that you're probably more able to find than I would be able to direct you to. But that really does actually lead to another question about someone saying, someone was saying, here we go. What was the profound, there's two questions in this one. What was the profound key insight that the Buddha got that nobody realized for thousands of years? Did some of his other teachers also didn't some of his other teachers also say it was important to have good moral behavior, wisdom, and to meditate? Yes, so that's what I was referring to. Sariputta and Moggallana, whom had different names, they're their ordination Pali names, they went in search of the truth. They went in search of enlightenment through the usual teaching, which had, you're quite rightly, for thousands of years, always, and in different religions also, many different religions teach that moral virtue, wisdom and meditation is the way towards enlightenment. But it was only the Buddha and maybe previous Buddhas in previous Buddha sasanas to this Buddha sasana, but it was only the Buddha who not came up with, but expounded, spoke to us about the simplicity of the Four Noble Truths. He tried all of the different teachers with all of their different practices, ascetic practices. He starved himself, emaciated he was for 6 years, living in very difficult environments for such a long time, 6 years. I've been to the cave where he sat between Sarnath and Varanasi, or near Rajgir in India. He sat in this cave for many, many months and lived around this area for 6 years, not eating, just a grain of rice. Actually near Bodh Gaya, I'm mixing the places all up here, near Bodh Gaya. And before he crossed the river, he was given this bowl of rice, which he went off then to Bodh Gaya for his enlightenment. Now the bowl of milk rice was contrary to his teacher's teachings in that it was giving him some nourishment, but he really had to do something about having practiced for 6 years and not achieved what maybe he was expecting to achieve. So he had this, and it sustained him, it gave him some energy. He was said to have put the bowl in the water and said that if it floats up the river Ganges, or up the river, not the river Ganges, the river the wrong way, he will become enlightened, and it did. So he crossed the river, he was given some sutra grass, like a grass mat like this is made of such a thing, but to sit under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, where he was able to become enlightened. But his enlightenment came from the realization and understanding that it is the Four Noble Truths. There is suffering. Firstly, just that. There is unsatisfactoriness in everything. But then that there can be, through meditation, a glimpse of the end, or at the end of unsatisfactoriness, the end of suffering, but one has to see what the cause is. And this is what the Buddha identified, which is different to all of those other teachers that came between the previous Buddha and this Buddha. So he gave us the Four Noble Truths. There is suffering, a cause of suffering, an end of suffering, and a path leading to the end of suffering, which none of these other teachers over thousands of years have done. And your other question is about, could I explain what are the four arupa jhanas? Base of boundless space, consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. How to understand them, especially the last one, that's perception and non-perception. From your previous Dharma talk, I also guess it's not essential to experience them. So, it's not to be expected and not essential, that is correct. Yeah, I will go on to explain these one day soon. They are there, and I did send you the link in that video. If you just Google English, not good, well, whatever, search English Buddhist Monk Jhanas, Jhanas, I think 3 or 4 talks come up of mine about that very subject. And I do talk about the arupa jhanas. But these are very high, these are practically enlightenment. These are very high attainments. So you have many levels of samadhi. All of these names and levels, this is going back towards all of that over-analytical thinking, overthinking, taking it all into too much detail rather than doing it. It's all reading the menu again rather than tasting the food. It's trying to learn swimming from a book, then jumping in the water and drowning rather than just paddling in the water carefully and learning to swim yourself. The Buddha teaches us that this is an experiential practice, to be experienced by the wise, seen by the wise. The wise being not the intellectuals, the people with a high IQ and many qualifications, but those who can understand, without too much distraction, the truth that there is suffering and its cause. And that's all one needs to understand. So hopefully I've not jumped around too much and lost the track of things. If I go back to that first question, this is very casual, isn't it? Probably running out of time now as well, because I didn't even think to look at the time. More about Sariputta. And how could we be more like him? Yes, well, there have been many disciples subsequent to Sariputta, Moggallana, and all of Ananda and all of the Buddha's disciples that he had with him in his lifetime. And then in that lineage of the Arya Sangha, the noble Sangha, the noble brotherhood of monks and nuns, bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, generations and generations later, in that very same lineage by way of the ordination process, today's bhikkhus and bhikkhunis you see and hear and teachers are coming directly from that. But we have teachers with whom we have great affinity too, but we wish to be like the Buddha. Now, if we wish to be like the teacher, it is because the teacher is being like the Buddha. So if we go back to the origin of being like the Buddha, then hopefully we will be like all of the teachers that came thereafter. Does that make sense? But a teacher that comes thereafter, that we have a particular affinity with, will help us to become like the Buddha if they are like the Buddha in a way that is understandable to you and resonates with your own way of being and personality. In this sense, I use the word personality because we have them, We have what is viewed as a result of causes and conditions that have been put in place, and we are responsible for also, that create what is seen by others and experienced by ourselves. So these words are being used here in a convention, as a way, by way of convention, to get a point across, an understanding. But what we are looking to be, how we can be more like him and to be like all of the teachers in that lineage, disciples of the Buddha in that lineage, but most importantly to be like the Buddha himself and to become free from suffering in this lifetime, to become enlightened. What do we have to do? We have to practice sila, samadhi, panya. That's it. That's all. We do the practice. We don't read about it, talk about it. We do it. Just do it. That's what we do. Next question. How do monks deal with aeroplanes? On aeroplanes, you can't do arms round. And I'm not sure if monks eat during this time. Depends on what time the meal is served, right? Yes, I mean, we fly on the airplane. We can't always pick and choose what time we're going on the airplane. And also there are time zone issues with this question. I tend to just relax about this. Once you're on the plane, I mean, if you're flying from just north to South India, that's just like going on a bus or a train. It makes no difference. But if you're flying east to west, halfway around the world, which is often the case, then you have to deal with time zones also, which is, I guess, more what you're referring to. However, we do not eat after noon, though that's when the sun is at its meridian, or before dawn. That is when the sun is just about to come up, so you can just about see the lines on your hand by the naked sky light. That is our sixth precept. We can survive if one day we skip a meal. So those among us who hold that a little bit more strictly than others might have to occasionally skip a meal when we're travelling, more often on a bus or a plane than because of a time zone or because we're on an aeroplane. When the food trolley comes around on the aeroplane, if it happens to be dawn in the country you've just set off from, it normally comes very quickly, the food trolley, from when you've taken off. You can have some food then, if it's still before noon. But if it's afternoon, you probably had food before you took off. So you ignore the food trolley. You can have some water, some cold water, even some Coca-Cola or something like that. This is no problem, it's being offered. But you would have maybe gone on Pindapata or alms round if you had time to in the morning. We don't get so het up about it. As I said recently, we don't hold these rules so tightly that we break them. We break an egg like by holding it tightly, or they become heavy. We hold them gently and we live practically. But we can very easily, if we are disciplined, also if we've been keeping that precept for a long time, skip a meal. Now I quite often, even without having to go on an aeroplane, might skip a meal. If it's only possible to get a hospital appointment at a certain time, and I might have just some quick meal in the morning. We will, as a matter of duty, when we're residing in a place, as I am here, I will go on Pindapata, alms round every day, whatever the day of the year. Someone asked me yesterday, will I be going on New Year's Day? Because there's another unit, I've lost count of New Year's this year, there's another one coming up soon here. I said, yes, I said, like Christmas Day. And he laughed and he said, yes, Christmas Day, because I did go on Christmas Day and everything, there was no one really much around, because people go and visit friends. It's a public holiday, even if it's not Christmas. So here in Sri Lanka, they have public holidays on all of the different religions' main days. So public holidays, there are less people around, because a lot of people go and visit their temples early in the morning, which means they have to set up set off early in the morning to offer dana to their main temples if there's some distance to go. So there are fewer people around. So he remembered Christmas Day, me not having much food, and he took me in a tuk-tuk to another place to get me some extra rice and dal. I had sufficient food, but being as it was Christmas Day, I wanted a little extra. I was thinking, well, I can have a holiday too on this one occasion. So still all within this noon thing. So on an aeroplane, you know, we just see how it goes. That's what we do. If you then land in the morning in your destination, it may be you have 2 mornings, and then you could go and eat again. It's still going to be noon, but within reason, if you need to. We don't need to get greedy about it. We don't hold these things so tightly, but strictly. I think just probably one more question. Someone was talking about the, it's a quick question, so maybe 2 more questions. Just discussing, I mentioned about counting the breaths when practicing. Ganesha says I've done enough now, look. Counting the breaths when practicing anapanasati, mindfulness of the breath. That they don't get on with that, but can see a good reason for it. Just to confirm, I mean, the main reason for that is if you're counting the breaths, breathing in 1, breathing out 1, breathing in 2, breathing out 2, you soon can identify where you lose mindfulness of the breath. When you lose count, you have to begin again from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you get to 7 and you don't remember, where I'm at, you know you go back to 1. You can see the progression of your mindfulness because you're identifying it with a number, with a figure. That's the practicality behind that, that's all. I think Ganesha's giving me a cue saying that I have talked for long enough for today. I hope there's something useful in there. If there is, please use it. I hope the sound is a bit better today. We have a new way of getting the sound to you, which I thought was quite important because I only listen to the sound when I listen to Dharma talks. The video, to me, isn't important really because you don't need to see it, do you? It's very nice sometimes, but I only have a little phone, so I mean, I like to listen to the sound, the words, the ambience of the environment where those words are being spoken. So please feel free to criticize, comment, because there are a few settings one can fiddle with, I'm sure, to improve the sound quality if it is necessary. If it's appalling, please let me know. I'm never quite sure how it comes across because it does change a little bit once it's uploaded to YouTube. So, and as I've just said before, I don't listen to these videos really anyway, so how would I know? Why would I? Yes, please feel free to comment on that. I hope there's something useful here. If so, please, I hope you can use it. And do share it with others if you can, your Kalyanamita, your friends on the path. And I've still got quite a bit of catching up to do as a result of my absence, so maybe I'll have the opportunity to talk to you again this week, subject to the builders tomorrow, and Ganesha allowing me to. We'll see how it goes. Anicca, uncertainty. So be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu.